5 we'll discuss about the interpretation. Okay, so this revision section includes 5 days. So this is my plan. So on day 1 we will be covering the major accounting standards. So day 1 and day 2 is for accounting standards. Okay, and on day 3 we'll be covering consolidation, then day 4 it's single entity, final accounts, how to prepare the final accounts, and on day 5 I will be discussing about the interpretation. So simply you can discuss about ratio analysis. So this is how we'll plan the section. Okay, so in between, like I will be having a, we know that's a revision section, so I can't go in depth to each and every standards, but again, in case if you have any specific doubts relates to any particular standards, you can just ask me. Okay guys, so am I audible to you? Is it clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, fine. So first of all, we'll start off with the main accounting standards. So I will go in that order in which our chapter goes. So first of all, just reverse about IAS 16. So we'll discuss about IAS 16. So we'll start off with IAS 16. So IAS 16 deals with PPE, right? So IAS 16 deals with PPE. So the question here is, since it's a revision section, when you are taking a particular section or a standard, should have a clear idea that what are the types of questions that you can expect from this area. Okay, so obviously if you are looking at the past papers, the questions, the type of questions that have been tested from this area is with respect to initial cost measurement. So in the past they have tested questions with respect to initial cost measurement. Okay, so we need to have a good knowledge about how will you estimate the initial cost of an asset. And if you are looking at the questions, they have discussed about subsequent treatments, subsequent cost treatments. Let's say they will give a scenario and you have to classify between the revenue expense and the capital expenditure. So you can expect such questions as well. And apart from that, obviously, there will be some straightforward question with respect to the calculation of depreciation. But even though it's straightforward, still you'll get confused with the a type of adjustments that they have in that particular question. So obviously, these all questions are getting tested in the MCQ section. So we can expect the accounting standards to get tested in the MCQs. But I don't think that PPU will be a standard that will get tested in section B. So it will be mainly tested in section A. Okay, so you can expect some MCQ type of questions with respect to PP. So it will cover the initial cost measurement, the subsequent treatment. So these are the different areas that they have tested in the past. Then with regards to revaluation, then yeah, so these are the types of questions that I can test with regards to this particular standard. Sorry, so can you see the screen now? Can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, fine. So we'll discuss these main areas. So I'm just focusing on these areas because this is what they have tested in the past. So first of all, let's begin with IAS 16. So IAS 16, we know that. What do you mean by IAS 16? IAS 16 is to account for PPE. So PPE means any asset which is held by an entity, but not for investment purpose. If you are using that asset for your own business purpose, then we can use it, when we can consider it as a PP. Okay, so anything up, but if you are using it, if you are keeping that asset for sale in the ordinary course of business, then we will classify it as inventory. if you are using that asset for your own business purpose or either for rendering services or for administrative purpose, in that situation we can account it as per PPE. And if it is for investment purpose, which standard will follow here, which is the standard will follow there, will follow IAS 40, that is investment. So that's about the definition of this particular standard, but I don't think that the definitions can come up in this situation. And when it comes to the initial measurement, how will you measure a PPE? How will you measure a PPE? We should include all costs that we have incurred directly in relation to the acquisition, as well as bringing that asset to its present condition will be included in the cost of a PPE. Okay, so literally, instead of learning or instead of memorizing different components that needs to be included with the cost of PPE, you can just learn it in such a way that any cost which you have incurred, to purchase that particular asset and bringing that asset to its present intended condition. To bring that asset to its present intended condition can be included with the cost of that asset. So it will include the purchase cost and any directly attributable cost. So directly attributable cost will include any kind of professional fees, any non-refundable taxes, okay, as well as let's say if you're carriage invest cost of inflation, site preparation, everything will be included within the initial cost of that. Is it clear? But in the same way, if you have a probability that in future this PP is going to get dismantled in future, let's think about a oil plant or something like that. You're digging something to get the oil. It's an oil plant, so you have to extract the oil from it. You have digged a big tunnel there. So once the extraction is over, we have to restore it or we have to dismantle it. So in that scenario, since it's a cost that we have incurred in relation to that particular asset, but even though this happens in the future, we have to consider it in the cost of that asset. If you are probable that you will incur a dismantling cost or a kind of dismantling cost or restoration cost at the end of that asset's life, we have to include it with the initial cost of the asset. So how will you include it? We'll take the present value of that dismantling cost and we'll include it in the cost of that asset. So literally the initial cost will include the initial cost of an asset will include any purchase price or any directly attributable cost as well as the present value of dismantling. So these are the main items that can get included in the initial cost of an asset. So once we have covered that initial measurement, so once we get that initial measurement, next one we need to know that how will you treat the what's the subsequent treatment of a PP. So once we measure the initial cost of a PP, we have got two different models to account for PP. What are the two different models? We can either follow cost model or we can follow revaluation model. Okay, so how will you treat it in the cost model? In the cost model, whatever the cost of an asset minus depreciation, then you will get the carrying amount. So this is how we'll treat it with respect to a cost model. Is it clear? But if it's a revaluation model, how will you treat it? Then it's like revalued amount minus depreciation, then you will get the carrying amount. Is it clear, everyone? Yes. Then when we are calculating the depreciation, we should always understand the fact that, let's say the actual life of the asset, the company have said that this machinery can be used for 20 years. But our company, the supplier have told that the machine can be used for 20 years. But our company is intending to use this asset for next 1.5 years. Sorry, for the next 5 years. So we are using that asset economically for 5 years. So how long we should depreciate that asset? How long we should depreciate that asset? How long we should depreciate that asset? Is it for 5 years or for 20 years? Yes, we'll only depreciate for 5 years. So the depreciation should be considered as an allocation of depreciable amount, to the expected useful life of the asset. Expected useful life. Okay, so depreciation is a process in which we'll allocate the depreciable amount. So what do you mean by depreciable amount? What do you mean by depreciable amount? The cost minus residual value. So it's an allocation of depreciable amount to the asset expected useful life. So here we are following which concept? We are following matching concept, because even though we have purchased the asset in the current year, since we are using it economically for the next 5 years, so the cost of this asset should match with its benefit. That's the reason we are providing the depreciation. So let's say if the asset does not have a useful life, for example, land, do we need to provide depreciation there? Is it clear, everyone? Is it clear, guys? So next one, it is revaluation. So what's the purpose of revaluation? What's the purpose of revaluation? What's the purpose of revaluation? Or why we follow revaluation model? Why can't we just focus on the cost model itself? Can you reply in the chat? Can you reply in the chat, guys? Underestimate profit. Is that the reason we are following revaluation model? Value of the asset changes along with year passing by. Okay. So let's say you have a land. That's what, for the fair presentation. The reason why we are preparing a financial statements using revaluation model. So revaluation model is a more of current accounting treatment. Like it's not on the basis of historical basis. We are considering the asset's current value basis. So we are measuring the current value of the asset. So especially an asset such as building, we know that this value of the building is keep on changing, right? With respect to the market, the value of the building keeps on changing. So if you are showing this building at the cost model, this value does not represent the real value of that asset, or this value does not represent the fair value of that asset. So in that situation, if you're following revaluation model, we'll make sure that there won't be any material difference between the carrying amount of that asset and the fair value of that asset in the market. So that's the reason we have to provide revaluation. That's the reason we are following revaluation model. So whenever we revalue an asset, we'll compare the carrying amount of the asset. We'll compare the carrying amount with the revalued amount. So this revaluation should be done in a very equal interval of time, so that it makes sure that at any point of time, there won't be any material difference between the carrying amount of the asset and its revalued amount. So how will you calculate the revaluation model? How will you calculate the revaluation? You have to find the carrying amount. That is cost minus depreciation. Then the carrying amount will get compared with the revalued amount. So in that situation, let's say if you have realized the gain, so realized the gain means the carrying amount is lower than the revalued amount. The revalued amount is higher, so then it's a gain. So this gain is known as, we'll term this gain as revaluation. We'll term this gain as revaluation gain. So where will you record it? Where will you record this revaluation gain? Can you record it in SOPL? No, because it's not an income that you have earned from our operation. Okay, it's an income that you have generated because of the volatility of that asset in the market. If you are reporting that gain in the P&L, it will actually distort your SOPL. Okay, that will literally distort your SOPL. So that's the reason the revaluation gain should be recorded in OCI. The revaluation gain should be recorded in the OCI. So there might be a question that, so if there is a revaluation loss, then can I show it in OCI? If there is a revaluation loss, can I show it in OCI? No. If it's a loss, then we have to record it in P and L. If it's a revaluation loss, I have to record it in the P and L. So what do you mean by revaluation loss? If the revalued amount is lower than, if the revalued amount is lower than the carrying amount of the asset, then we will consider it as revaluation loss. So where will you record it? It should be recorded in P and L, unless we already had a revaluation surplus belongs to the same asset. Let's say we had a before 2 years or something like that, we have already revalued this asset, and on the subsequent revaluation there is a loss. So in that scenario, since there is a revaluation surplus which we have recognized in OCI, whenever there is a revaluation loss, first of all we'll write off this revaluation surplus balance which is held in OCI, and anything excess, let's say the revaluation loss is 25,000, but in the revaluation surplus balance there is 20,000. So in that situation, that 25,000 will first of all used to write off your revaluation surplus balance, and anything excess will get write off to P&L as an expense. Is it clear, everyone? Is it clear, guys? Yeah. So these are the main aspects we have to learn with respect to IAS 16. So we need to know how to measure the initial cost. So make sure that it's better you'll study what are the costs that cannot be included in the initial cost. Then it will be literally easy for you. Okay, so rather than just focusing on the fact that what all items can I can include, just focus on the items that cannot be included. So it will include the wastage of material, initial losses, the relocation cost, or the administration cost, okay, or the training, staff training cost. These items cannot be included in the initial cost of an asset. So literally whatever which comes apart from that, we can just add it to the value of that asset. And most importantly, in the initial measurement, you have to discuss about the dismantling cost. So how will you calculate the dismantling cost? So whenever we calculate the dismantling cost, we have to calculate the present value of the future dismantling cost, and it will get added to the value of asset. So debit asset, and will credit as a provision for dismantling. We'll create a provision for dismantling. Why we need to create a provision there? Because we know that we don't have any choice. Once the extraction is over, we have to do the registration there. Okay, so in that scenario, we have an obligation, and we are probable that we have to incur it in the future. So in that scenario, we'll create a provision. So this is the accounting treatment. So this is the accounting treatment for dismantling cost. So this asset, whatever the amount we have calculated as present value of future dismantling cost, will be accounted as the part of your initial cost. Is it clear, everyone? So these are the main elements you have to learn with respect to IAS 16. Is there any doubts? Okay. So there is one more other stuff which is not that much tested, but still it's a part of your IAS 16 portion in F7. That is with respect to overhaul. So what do you mean by overhaul? What do you mean by overhaul? Let's say there is a major repair, something happens. So this overhaul mainly will happen for a complex assets. Complex asset means asset which is having different useful life, such as ship or aircraft or something like that. So whenever there is an overhaul, the question here is, do you need to create a provision as we have done for dismantling cost? No, we don't create a provision here, because the company have a choice to avoid it. The company have a choice whether to incur that overhaul or not. Let's say if the overhaul happens every 10 years of that asset, I do have an option to sell this asset before the overhaul comes, right? So in that situation, there is no need to create a provision. Instead, how will you treat the overhaul? The overhaul will be the cost of overhaul will be treated as an additional component, and we'll depreciate it till next overhaul. Is it clear, everyone? Is it clear, everyone? So you just need to know this treatment. Even I have seen that there is only one MCQs which is there in BPP, but they're just asking the fact that how's the treatment for overhaul. You just need to know that treatment. That's it. Is it clear, everyone? Yes. And with respect to revaluation, sometimes back in December 2008, they have tested some accounting entries. Okay, so let's say an asset which has been revalued upward earlier, now it is revalued downward. So how will you treat it? It has been revalued upward in earlier, and now it is revalued downward. So how will you pass the entry? I've already told it. I've already explained that situation here. Now it is devalued downwards, right? So anyway, we know that the asset is going down. So credit non-current asset. And what about debit? Will you charge the whole amount to P&L? No. Since it has been revalued upward earlier, so debit revaluation surplus balance, and anything in difference. If there is any balance left, that balancing figure will go to P&L. Is it clear, everyone? I hope you understood that entry. Jasmina, is it clear? Because here the asset has been revalued upward earlier. So there is a revaluation surplus balance. Now the same asset is revalued downward. So first of all, we'll write off that revaluation surplus balance, and anything excess will get charged to P&L. And obviously, since it's a revaluation, downward revaluation, it will decrease the value of the asset. So that's why I've given a credit of NCA. Credit NCA has been given. Is it clear, everyone? Yes. So in the same situation, let's say with respect to that question, if it's the opposite situation, if the asset was devalued downward earlier and now it is revalued upward, what will be the entry? How will you pass the entry there? How will you pass the entry there? Just debit NCA. And can you credit the whole amount to revaluation surplus? No. Since you recognize a loss with respect to that asset in the past, so that loss will get reversed. So it will get credited to SOPL, and anything excess that will get credited to revaluation surplus. If the balance sheet figure will go to revaluation surplus. Is it clear, everyone? Is it clear, guys? Yeah. So in the same, so these are some main type of treatments we have to learn with respect to revaluation. So we have discussed about this upward revaluation, downward revaluation. Another scenario that can come is, we know that whenever an asset is getting revalued, whenever an asset is getting revalued, what will happen there? We know that as a part of that revaluation, since the asset value has been increased, since the asset value has been increased in past, since the asset value has been increased in past, there will be a higher depreciation. So there will be a higher depreciation compared to the previous years. So because of that reason, since the depreciation has been increased compared to the previous years, we know that this excess depreciation will impact your SOPL, right? This excess depreciation will have an impact on your SOPL. What will be the impact there? What will be the impact there? Will it increase your profit or will it decrease your profit? Will it increase your profit or will it decrease your profit? Can I reply in the chat? Yeah, it will decrease your profit. So literally, it will decrease your profit, decrease our company's profit, and thereby it will decrease our retained earnings as well. So it will thereby it will decrease your retained earnings as well. Isn't it? So how will you remove that impact? The standard is giving an option that excess depreciation. So whatever the excess depreciation compared to the previous years, that excess depreciation amount can be transferred, can be transferred from revaluation surplus balance to retained earnings. Is it clear? So what should be the entry? It should be debit revaluation surplus and credit retained earnings. So this will happen in the statement of changes in equity. So ultimately, if you are asking a question, there might be a question that what is the new depreciation charge? The new depreciation charge will be the same. We will not reduce the new depreciation charge. The depreciation charge to the SOPL will be calculated on the revalued amount, but that excess depreciation, like previously our assets carrying amount was a lower amount, right? So now because of the revaluation, the asset value has been increased and thereby it will increase your depreciation as well. So that excess depreciation will be transferred from revaluation surplus to retained earnings. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, so these are the main components main accounting treatments that you have to learn with respect to IAS 16. So is there any doubts? Do you have any doubts? Okay, so today we'll revise different accounting standards and you can just go through the standards again. and tomorrow we'll do the question practice. Okay. So today I'm just reversing the main aspects, and you can reverse the same accounting standards that I have reversed today, and just go. I will just give a note as well. So just go through that note, and on next day we'll discuss in the standards questions in detail. Okay. Yeah. So this excess amount will get reduced from revaluation surplus to retained earnings. Yeah, I will take conceptual framework. I will take. No. This is not compulsory. Actually, it's an option given to the company. It's an option given to the company, but mostly everyone does that. But it's an option that is given to the company by IFRS. If they want, they can transfer it. It's not compulsory that every company should do it. Is it clear, guys? Shall we move to the next standard? Is there any doubts with respect to IAS 16? Yes, fine. So next one, it is IAS 38. So I'm going to revise the standard. IAS 38. So what is IAS 38? IAS 38 discuss about intangible asset. So what do you mean by intangible asset? We have to remember three main points. First one, identifiable, non-monetary. Then what else? Identifiable, non-monetary. What else is there? And obviously, since it's a intangible asset, does not have a physical form. So if it meets these three criteria, then we can easily learn the definition of intangible asset. So what do you mean by identifiable? What do you mean by the term identifiable? What do you mean by the term identifiable? Sorry guys, there was a network connection issue. So can you hear me now? Is it clear? Yeah, fine. So yeah, just discuss about that part. So what do you mean by identifiability? Goodwill, the trademark of a company, the must-haves. Is these items are identifiable? Is it an identifiable item? So if you, can you sell the goodwill of a company separately? Can you just sell the goodwill of a company separately? No. Why? Because goodwill is something that has been this goodwill is something which has been resulted as a performance of the business, isn't it? Is it clear, guys? So that's the reason the goodwill is not identified. So even though we may feel it's like an intangible asset, goodwill is not an intangible asset because it does not meet the criteria. It is not identifiable. Next one, non-monetary. So what do you mean by the term non-monetary? What do you mean by the term non-monetary? Not convert in non-fixed value. Yes, let's say if you have a land or building, it doesn't have a defined value. Does it have a defined value? If I'm giving you a check which is worth 1 lakh, is it a defined asset? Is it a monetary asset? Is it a monetary asset? Yes, because that does have a defined value there, right? But when it comes to land or building, it's a non stage does not have physical form. So one of the recent updation that has been happened to intangible assets cryptocurrency started it made in the of estate because you know that that's how it's identifiable because we can literally sell it to different platforms as was here apps are there as well as it does not have monetary value. No, it's non-monetary because it keeps on changing and does not have a physical are getting account as per IAS 38. Is it clear now? Hello, hello. Just wait, just wait, just wait. I think there is a connectivity issue. Just wait. So can you hear me, guys? Yeah. Okay. So that's what we are just discussing about IAS 38. So I hope you have heard that example as well. So crypto is the latest addition that have came to IAS 38. So we have started to record. We have started accounting for cryptocurrency as per IAS 38 because according to the nature of that cryptocurrency, it is an identifiable item and it's non-monetary and does not have a physical form as well. Is it clear, everyone? So once we learn IAS 16, IAS 38 also is getting treated almost the same way as IAS 16 as well. Okay, so how we have accounted for IAS 16, the initial cost. How we have accounted for the initial cost. How was the initial recognition? How was the initial recognition? Yeah, cost, right? So initial recognition is at cost. So same as IAS 16, even IAS 38 also follows the same accounting standard. So you can just relate that. Okay. Again, are same as IAS 16. That is, subsequently, if you incur any expenditure to, that is revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. So what do you mean by revenue expenditure? What do you mean by revenue expenditure? I'm just turning off the cam. Okay. So I think then the clarity will be better. So is it clear now? Yes. Okay. So the subsequent expenditure, we have two classifications. We'll classify the expenditures into two types. That is revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. So what do you mean by revenue expenditure? What do you mean by revenue expenditure? Yeah, it's like a day-to-day expenses, or simply we can say that it does not bring any additional earnings to the company. If any cost that you have incurred that is not bringing any additional earning capacity, then we'll account it as a revenue expenditure. Okay. But any type of cost that can bring additional benefits to the company, then we'll consider it as capital expenditure. So it will be accounted as an asset itself. It will be accounted as an asset itself. Is it clear, everyone? Then what about the subsequent recognition? What about the subsequent recognition? Again, we have got two models, that is cost model or fair value model. So they have got two models. What are they? Cost model and okay. So this fair value model means the revaluation model. So again, it is, we are following the same concepts as of IAS 16 here. Is it clear, everyone? So it's an overall summary about this standard. Is it clear, guys? This part. Okay. So the only difference here when it comes to IAS 38 is, with respect to IAS 16, we used to refer it as depreciation. But when it comes to IAS 38, instead of depreciation, we'll call it as amortization. We'll call it as amortization. Okay. So the concept behind depreciation and amortization is same. That is literally the allocation of depreciable amount to the useful life of the asset. But that's a difficult part in IAS 38 because it rarely, in very less chances, we can estimate the definite useful life of a intangible asset. So mostly the intangible asset will have a indefinite useful life. So as a result, we can't provide amortization. Instead, it is mandatory that every year we have to check for we have to submit it for impairment review. You have to submit it for impairment review. Okay. If it is having definite useful life, obviously we have to provide amortization. But if it's an intangible asset with indefinite useful life, even without getting any impairment indicator, we have to do the impairment review. Is it clear, everyone? What do you mean by impairment, guys? If the carrying amount of the asset is higher than the recoverable amount of that asset, okay, the maximum amount we can recover from the asset. We'll discuss it in detail in the next standard. I'm going to discuss is about IAS 36 itself. So just for the time being, I hope you have learned in your, you have attended any classes, right? So you know what is impairment. So just keep it in mind. If it's an asset, intangible asset with indefinite useful life, then We have to provide impairment review without any impairment interference. Is it clear, everyone? So what are the different types of intangible asset? So they are intangible assets such as purchased goodwill. So purchased goodwill, that is accounted using, how will you account for it? We'll account for it using IFRS 3. But since it's a goodwill, we know it's an intangible item. But the purchase goodwill calculation will be treated as per IFRS 3, that is business combination. The treatment, the calculation of this goodwill will be done as per IFRS 3, which is business combination, that you learn in consolidation chapter. Is it clear, guys? Okay, so apart from that, what are the other different types of intangible asset apart from this one? Is there any other intangible asset? Yes, there are intangible asset which are acquired separately. Let's say if I acquire a patent or copyright, okay, patent or copyrights, all these items are examples of acquired intangible assets which are acquired separate. So we have discussed about purchase goodwill. We have discussed about acquired intangible assets which are acquired separately, that is patent or copyrights. And they are intangible assets which are internally generated. And one of the example being research, and so it's a special item which you have to learn, which is research and development expenditure. So that's a intangible item. That's an internally generated item. So here we'll classify this research and R&D expense. The R&D expense into two types. We can classify it as to two types. So what are they? Here they have told that according to the standard, research, when we research something, we are trying to find out something new, right? We are trying to come up with a new product, or we are trying to find an alternative for your existing raw material. So since it's a journey to find out something new, we have to account it as an expense. We have to account it as an expense. And what about the development expenditure? The development expenditure will be accounted as a, how will you account for it? Yes, we will capitalize it. We'll capitalize it. We'll capitalize it. We'll capitalize it if it meets certain criteria. So if it is meeting certain criteria, then we will capitalize it. So what are the criteria? What are the different criteria? Yeah, we have to follow the pyrite criteria. Very good. We have to follow the pyrite criteria. So pyrite means probable that we will get future economic inflow. Then I, there should be an intention to complete. R, we should have sufficient adequate resources available to complete the project. Then A, it is the ability to use or sell. We should be able to use or sell this asset. And T for technical feasibility, and E for the fact that the expenditure should be reliably measured. So if all these criteria are met, then we can capitalize it. Is it clear, everyone?
Yes.
So these are the main different types of intangible assets that you have to learn with respect to IAS 38. So most importantly, you can expect the questions with respect to, so most importantly, the examinable topics with regards to this one. Obviously, you can just expect the questions from research and development. So you have to properly read the situation. It's literally a cakewalk for you once you understood the difference. Make sure that you read the questions carefully and just understand that which all needs to be accounted as expenditures, as expense in the P&L, and which element do we need to account as a asset in the P&L. So clear, everyone? So mostly you can expect the questions from R&D area. Most of the questions you can expect MCQ question from the R&D area. Okay, so I'm just moving on to the next standard. The next one it is IAS 36, which is impairment. So after covering these two standards, IAS 16 and IAS 38, we do know that sometimes the carrying amount of the asset can be literally overstated in the books. So in that scenario, we'll do something known as impairment. So what do you mean by impairment? A fall in value of an asset, a fall in value of an asset. As a result, the recoverable amount of the asset will be lower than its carrying amount. We'll account for the situation as impairment. We'll account for the situation as impairment. Is it clear, everyone? Now, the question is, what do you mean by recoverable amount? What do you mean by recoverable amount? Can you reply in the chat? What do you mean by recoverable amount? The higher of value in use or cost to sell. Yes, the recoverable amount means it's a higher of. So how will you calculate the recoverable amount? So recoverable amount is higher of value in use or fair value less cost of disposal. Is it clear? It's clear, everyone? Okay. So how will you calculate the value in use of an asset? How will you calculate the value in use of an asset? How will you calculate the value in use of an asset? So value in use, right? So value in use means the present value of future cash flows that we can expect from the asset. The present value of future cash flows. That is, it will include inflows and outflows. We have to consider the inflows and outflows. So inflows will get netted off with the outflows, and we'll take the present value of that cash flow. Is it clear? So always note that after the impairment, the asset will be shown at its recoverable amount. So since the asset is getting impaired, after the impairment, the asset will get, after the impairment, the asset will, that particular impaired asset will be shown at its recoverable amount. So is it clear, everyone? So when we calculate this value in use, we should use a discounting rate. So which one will be using, which one will use as the discounting rate? It will be the cost of capital of a company. The discounting rate can be the cost of capital of a company, or it can be the incremental borrowing rate. So the discounting rates that you can use will be the cost of capital or the incremental borrowing rate, or if none of these items are given, they can use the market rate. They can use the market rate. Is it clear? Okay. So once an asset is getting impaired, so till now we are just focusing on the individual asset. So in the same way, sometimes a CGU can get impaired. So what do you mean by CGU? What do you mean by CGU? The smallest, yeah, the smallest group of identifiable asset. The smallest group of identifiable assets, which can generate cash flows, but this cash flows is not dependent on any other asset. Let's say you have a branch of KFC in Kochi, that particular, like maybe in MG Road. So in that scenario, we can consider that KFC store as a CGU, because there are smallest group of identifiable asset which can generate cash flows independently. Is it clear? So whenever a CGU is getting impaired, so obviously the CGU will have a goodwill. The brand name is there, so they will have machine. So tangible assets are there, and they will have some other intangible assets such as the copyright and patent and all this stuff, their secret recipes. Then they might be having some receivables. So receivables means it's a current asset, right? So they will have goodwill, they will have machines such as tangible assets, then building. These all are tangible assets. So they might be having receivables. So as a group, we can call it as a CGU. As a group, we can call it as a CGU. So the question here is, let's say if that particular CGU is getting impaired, if maybe because of a fire or something like that, it got damaged because of a fire. So in that scenario, we can consider it as an impairment indicator, and we have to test for the impairment. Now the question is, how will you allocate that impairment loss? Let's say if there is an impairment loss of 50, where will I charge it? Will I charge it to goodwill, or will I charge it to machines, or should I charge it to intangible asset, or should I charge it to receivables? Okay, so we'll do this allocation. We'll do the order of allocation. The order of impairment allocation to CGU. So how will you allocate it? How will you allocate it? First one, to any specific asset. If there is any specific asset impaired, they will mention it in the question. In that scenario, we have to give the impairment to that specific asset. Okay. Then if there is no such specific asset we have identified, then we can charge it to goodwill. So when we charge the impairment to goodwill, we'll charge the impairment till it reduced to nil. We'll charge the impairment till the asset value reduced to nil. Okay. Then anything excess, anything balance will get charged to other non-current assets to other assets excluding current assets, because current asset won't get impaired, excluding current asset on pro rata basis. So pro rata basis means on the base of its carrying amount. On the base of this carrying amount, on the base of that weightage, we'll allocate the impairment. Is it clear, everyone? Can you consider a subsidiary as a CGU? Can you consider the subsidiary company as a CGU? Yes, even subsidiary of a company is also CGU. Okay, so in that situation, if you are asked to calculate the impairment, of subsidiary, will follow the same concept as you have followed for a CGU. So the total carrying amount of subsidiary will be compared with the recoverable amount. Okay, the total carrying amount of a company will get compared with the recoverable amount. So the carrying amount of the subsidiary will include the subsidiary's net assets plus goodwill minus the recoverable amount. So that's how we'll calculate the impairment loss. Is it clear, everyone? Is it clear, guys? Yeah, fine. So obviously, in the examinable topics, we should give higher importance to CGU. So CGU is, of course, it's a for sure question. CGU can get tested. Okay, so make sure that you understood the impairment allocation with respect to CGU. Okay, even sometimes I have seen that there can be some 20 mark questions arising from this CGU area in section B. So even in section B, CGU can be tested. There are instances in which they have tested. So let's say if an impair, like it's a very rare chance, like let's say the subsidiary, we know that subsidiary it's a CGU, right? Because subsidiary is a separate, it's a group of asset. So the subsidiary itself can be considered as a CGU. So if you are asked to calculate the impairment loss of a subsidiary, the subsidiary's impairment will include the net assets of the subsidiary, the book value, plus the goodwill. The goodwill also should be considered. Then it will get compared with the recoverable amount of a subsidiary, then you will get the impairment loss. Is it clear? So these are the main aspects of the standard IAS 36. So is it clear, everyone? Any doubts? So next one we are going to discuss about the standard which is IAS 23, which is borrowing cost. So how will you account for the IAS 23 borrowing cost? How will you account for IAS 23 borrowing cost? So borrowing cost means literally the cost incurred by an entity from the borrowed funds on borrowed funds. Is it clear? That's what known as borrowing cost. So the cost incurred by an entity on the borrowed funds. That's what known as borrowing cost. So normally, simply the interest expenses. So normally, how you used to account for the interest expense? Will account to P and L as expense, right? That's how we normally treat for interest expense. Treat the interest expense. But if it's a borrowing cost, which you have incurred in relation, if it's a borrowing cost which you have incurred in relation to a qualifying asset, then how will you account for it? We have to capitalize it. We have to capitalize the cost. Instead of writing off it as an expense, we'll capitalize it. What's the reason we are capitalizing it? Because we are just constructing that asset. So we are constructing that qualifying asset. So during the time of construction, are you getting any sort of income? Are you getting any sort of income there? No. So if you're showing it as an expense during the time of construction, so we have taken this loan for making this asset, right? So if you are expensing this to P and L, literally we can see that. So the interest expenses is getting charged to P and L, and there is no income is getting recognized with respect to that asset. So literally, it will understate your profit. We know that we have to prepare the P&L statement according to matching concept. So always the income should match with the expense. So literally, when we are incurring any sort of borrowing cost on a qualifying asset. So what do you mean by qualifying asset? What do you mean by qualifying asset? An asset which has been taking a subsequent period of time, a substantial amount of time, okay, to its completion. That is known as qualifying asset. An asset which it takes a substantial period of time to complete. That is known as qualifying asset. So if you are taking some loan, with respect to the production of an inventory, can you consider it as a qualifying asset? You have taken loan for the production of inventories. No. If it's a maturing inventory, can you consider it? If it's a maturing inventory, yes, we can. Okay. So if it's a normal inventory which are made in bulk, we'll not consider it as a qualifying asset. But if it's a maturing inventory which takes a substantial bit of time for its completion, in that scenario, we can consider it as a qualifying asset. Perfect. Okay. So I hope you understood the reason behind why we are accounting for the borrowing cost instead of charging it to P&L. Why it's the reason behind we are capitalizing it. I hope it's clear, everyone. Okay. So now the question is, we know that it needs to be capitalized. So when we should start? So what's the commencement date? When we should start providing the depreciation, so that capitalization, when the capitalization process should start? The capitalization process should start from 3 subsequent dates. That is, first one, from the date the expenditures on the asset, from the date the expenditure on the asset being incurred. Then next one, from the date borrowing costs are being incurred. Then finally, activities are in progress. That is, activities which are necessary to prepare the asset for its intended sale or use are in progress. So in that situation, we can consider it as a, if these 3 criteria are met, if all these 3 criteria are met, then we can capitalize the dismantling cost. We can capitalize that borrowing cost. Let's say you have started incurring the loan amount, you have started to incur the loan charges from January, but the expenditures on the asset being incurred, such as you have purchased the raw materials and you have started the construction, everything from March. So in that scenario, from which date you have to start the process of borrowing, capitalizing the borrowing cost? Is it from January or is it from March? It's from March. Okay, so all these criteria should be met. So in order to commence the capitalization, all these criteria should be met. All these criteria should be met. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? Yes. So we know that when to capitalize. So now the question is how to calculate it. How to calculate the borrowing cost being incurred. So the borrowing cost will be capitalized. And how will you do the calculation? There are 2 situations. First one, if it's a specific loan, and second situation, if there is general borrowings. Okay, so if it's specific loan, we know that there is only one interest rate. There is only one interest rate, right? Because it's a specific loan. So how will you calculate the interest cost here? How will you calculate the borrowing cost here? It's a borrowing cost incurred minus interest received on short-term. Is it clear? Is it clear, guys? Any doubts on this part? And if it's a general borrowing cost, in that scenario, we have a pool of fund, right? So we have to calculate the interest rates because there is no specific loan. So we'll get confused about the fact that which rate I should use to do the capitalization. In that scenario, we have to use the weighted average rate. So how will you calculate the weighted average rate? It is total interest cost, the total interest cost which you incur divided by total loan. Is it clear, everyone? So this is how we'll calculate the rate that should be used to capitalize the rate to be. So this is how we'll calculate the rate to be capitalized. Is it clear, everyone? Yes. Next one. Once we start the process of capitalization, then in between, do we need to suspend it? Do we need to suspend it? Do we need to suspend in any situations? Yes. Which all situations? In which all situations? Suspension means for that time being, we won't capitalize it. We have to charge it to the P&L. So that's what mean by suspension. So suspension will happen. The suspension will happen if the first situation, if the active development of the asset, the active development of the asset is interrupted. So if the active development of the asset is interrupted for a specific period of time, let's say the laborers working for a strike, going for a strike, or due to any natural calamities, your works are getting stuck, there is no progression in the value of asset there, right? The asset value is not increasing. So during that time period, we are not allowed to capitalize the interest expense. We have to expense it off. So during that time period, we have to expense it off to the P&L. So clear, guys? Then the suspension is, at the same time, make sure that the suspension is not necessary. The suspension is not necessary for, if it is temporary, if the interruption is for temporary days, or when, just 1 minute. ഞാൻ FR ഗ്രൂപ്പിൽ അത് പറയാൻ വിളിച്ചു, ഞാൻ അഡ്മിൻ അല്ലായിരുന്നു FR ഗ്രൂപ്പിൽ, അത് പറയാൻ വിളിച്ചതാണ്, പിന്നെ ചെയ്തു ബാക്കി. So can you hear me? Yeah. So suspension is not necessary for temporary days or when the break has been taken. It's a part of the construction, maybe for any administrative purpose or as a part of construction. We know that once we construct a particular floor, we have to leave that we have to leave it for that concrete to get settled, right? And so such kind of temporary delays, we can still continue with the process of capitalization. Is it clear, guys? Yes. So next one. What else we need to consider? Finally, when we should cease, when we should completely stop the process of capitalization. when we should completely cease it or cessation. So when we should completely cess it, stop it. When substantially, literally we can say that when the asset is ready for use and all activities necessary for its completion is done, is complete. At that point of time, we can cease that process of capitalization. Is it clear, everyone? So the cessation, or when we should stop the process of stop the process of capitalization. We should stop it when the asset is ready for use or substantially all works related to that construction are completed. And when the asset is completed in parts, once that part is completed and we can use that part even if the works on the other parts is going on, then we should stop the capitalization for that part. So we should stop the capitalization process of that particular part when it is completed. So when the asset is completed in parts, so when that particular part is done, we have to stop the capitalization process with regard to that parts, even if the work is going on for the other parts. So even that should be noted with respect to cessation. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat, guys? Is it clear? Okay. So we have completed 4 standards, that is IAS 16, IAS 38, then IAS 36 and IAS 23. So now we are moving on to the next standard, which is investment property, which is IAS 40. So it is investment property. So you might have heard, you might have seen that even in IAS 16, there is a definition that the tangible asset which is held for business purpose, but business purpose means it's a held for the administrative purpose or for rendering services, or even for rentals, is coming as a part of your definition for IAS 16. Have you noticed it? Have you noticed that definition? So even if in IAS 16 it is mentioned that tangible asset which are held by the company for the administrative purpose or for rendering services or good, even for earning rentals, is coming as a part of the definition of IAS 16. But when it's an investment property, IAS 16 is for IAS 40 is for investment property. So investment property means land and buildings. So the property here means it's a land and buildings. So if it is land and buildings held for investment purpose, such as earning rentals, or capital appreciation, then we will account it as investment property. So investment property. So what do you mean by property? Property means land and buildings. So out of PPE, plant, property and equipment, if the property which is held by the business for earning rentals or capital appreciation, then will be accounted when we will account it as investment property. Is it clear, everyone? So with regards to other assets, even the recognition criteria are same. That is, it is probable that we will get future economic inflow from the asset, and the cost should be reliably measurable. And what about the initial measurement? What about the initial measurement? So what about the initial measurement? Again, here the initial measurement is at cost. And what about the subsequent cost? The subsequent cost we have two models, which is cost model, and instead of revaluation model, we will use a model which is known as fair value. So if it is cost model, we know that how will you account it? It is cost minus accumulated depreciation minus impairment loss. But if it is fair value model, we won't account, we don't need to provide depreciation or impairment. If it's a fair value model, then we don't need to provide depreciation or impairment. The fair value movements will get recognized in the P&L. The fair value movements will get recognized in P&L. Is it clear, everyone? So let's say in theory question, there can be a question that, let's say the company have chosen cost model for one investment property. Then is it mandatory that they have to follow the cost model for other investment properties as well? When the company chooses the fair value model or a cost model for one investment property, is it mandatory that we have to choose the same model for the other properties? Yes, it is mandatory. The same way, even if it comes to IAS 16, whenever we follow the revaluation model for a class of asset, the same model should be applied to the assets which are the same class. Same class means which is having same nature and same use. But again, this transfer is applicable. So let's say if the one of the model, every other fair value, every other investment properties are using cost model, and you have seen that one specific item is getting treated as per fair value model. That change or this transfer is allowed only if it results in a more appropriate presentation. So if you can convince the auditor in such a way that it is for the better presentation, I have made this change from investment properties cost model to fair value model, then that change is allowed. Is it clear, everyone? Okay. So another type of question you can expect from investment property is, let's say there is change in use. There is change in use. So change in use means, for example, previously we were using this building as a head office. So now we have started to giving it a rentals. So now we have given to rentals from June 2021. So till June 2021, we were accounting it as, we were using it as our head office. So now we have shifted to a new office, and current office is given for rentals. So in that scenario, we know that it's a shift from, if it has been used as head office, which standard will you apply there? Which standard will you apply there? It's a 6 from IAS 16 to, very good. It's a 6 from IAS 16 to IAS 40. So on that date of change, the date of change, the treatment of difference between the carrying amount and fair value should be recognized in revaluation surplus. So on the date of change, the treatment of difference will be accounted as a part of your revaluation surplus if the asset was originally treated as IAS 60. Is it clear? Because originally it was a head office item. The asset was used as a head office. So now we are moving it to a new office. So now it is given for rentals. So in that scenario, on the date of change, if there is any fair value movement, even though we have moved to IAS 40, on the date of change, the gain will be recognized in OCA. Okay. But in the same scenario, let's say if this asset was originally treated as per IAS 40, the asset was originally treated as per IAS 40. So where we would have record this change? We'll record it in P. So let's say if there is a transfer from IAS 40 to IAS 16, the difference between the carrying amount and the fair value at the date of change will be recorded in P. Is it clear? Perfect. Okay, guys. So these are the main important standards you have to learn. That is something which is really basic. And the kind of questions that you can expect here, obviously the examinable topic will be this change in use. Obviously, this change in use is an important examinable topic. So make sure that you note it down. Okay. So make sure that you understand that concept with respect to change in use. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, perfect. Now, with respect to the next standard, which is IFRS 5. So what is IFRS 5? Non-current asset held for sale. So if it's a non-current asset held for sale as well as discontinued operation, that will get treated under IFRS 5. That will get treated under IFRS. So how will you, how an asset can be classified asset held for sale? What's the criteria? First one, the asset should be immediately available for the asset should be immediately available for sale. The asset should be immediately available for sale. And second one, the sale must be highly probable. Okay. As well as the sale should take place within next 12 months. If all these criteria are met, then we can account it as per IFRS 5. Then we can treat it as a asset held for sale. Is it clear, everyone? But that doesn't mean that every time if it exceeds the 12 months, then the company we have to reverse the treatment. Let's say even if it exceeded 12 months, there was a delay of more than 12 months, the sale does not happen within the 12 months. In that scenario, the sale does not happen, it's fine. But if it is beyond the control of our entity, it was not intentional. So let's say because of corona or something like that, there was a delay in the sale. That was beyond the control of the entity. So that will not make us to revert, that will not restrict us from showing that asset as a non-current asset held for sale in your financial statements. That means that we can continue to show that asset as a non-current asset held for sale in your financial statements. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? So if it is caused by any events which is beyond the control of the entity, then we do have an option to continue to show it as a asset held for sale. So there are certain criteria. So what you have just learned, the criteria to asset to be classified as held for sale. But I have told that the sale must be highly probable. It's written that the sale must be highly probable. So how will you account for it? How will you understand whether it is highly probable or not? How will you understand whether it is highly probable or not? Can you reply in the chat? How will you understand whether it is highly probable or not? First one, the management should be committed to the plan. Okay, the management should be committed to the plan. Then there should be an active program to locate the buyer. So there should be an active plan to program or plan to, let's say if you are given an advertisement or something like that, we can confirm it as a reasonable evidence that okay, the sale is going to happen. Then the selling price should reflect the fair value of this item in the market. So there should not be any material difference between the actual market value and the selling price. Is it clear? Then the sale should be expect to that we have already, so it's almost the same. The sale should expect to happen within the 12 months, and it is unlikely that the management will withdraw from the plan, and it will be unlikely that the management will be withdrawing from the plan. Is it clear? So all these factors determine whether the sale is highly probable or not. Is it clear, everyone? Okay. So once the asset is held for sale, once the asset is held for sale, then subsequently, we have two options. Either the asset can be shown at carrying amount or fair value less cost to disposal. So whichever is lower, we will choose that figure. Is it clear? So once that particular asset is held for sale, then we have to either show it at lower of, so it should be lower of carrying amount or fair value less cost to disposal. Another important rule is the non-current asset held for sale will not get depreciated. So this particular asset should not be depreciated, but we can test for impairment. We can test it for impairment. Is it clear, everyone? Okay. Now, so you can expect the questions with regards to the same treatment, and most importantly, next one, if there is a reversal, so reversal means now the asset is no more held for sale. So in that situation, how will you treat it? We have to show this asset. And one more important factor, since it is asset held for sale, it will be classified under current assets. It will be classified under current assets. So even that is important. Even that treatment should be done. Okay. So if the asset is not held for sale, no more held for sale, in that scenario, the asset should be shown at lower of first option. The carrying amount of asset, you have to calculate the carrying amount of asset adjusted for any depreciation in the meantime, as well as the recoverable amount or the recoverable amount at the date of decision not to sell. Okay, so if the asset is not held for sale anymore, then we can reclassify this asset. Okay, so we can reverse our treatment. So it should be lower of carrying amount of the asset adjusted for any depreciation in the meantime, or the recoverable amount at the date of decision not to sell. Is it clear? Fine. So what about discontinued operation? So how will you treat? What do you mean by discontinued operation? If it represents a separate line of your business or a separate geographical area, or a subsidiary which is taken, which is viewed to resale, everything will be meeting the definition of discontinued operation. Is it clear, everyone? So if you are planning to dispose a separate line of business, or if the part of single coordinator plan to dispose a separate line of a business or a geographical area of operation, or a subsidiary which has been acquired with a view to resale, everything will be accounted as a discontinued operation. So here the treatment is we have to disclose the results of discontinued operation separately. That is profit or loss from discontinued operation will be shown separately in the face of the P&L with respect to continuing operation. So we'll make the heading separately. So this is the profit from continuing operation and this is the amount from discontinued operation. Is it clear? Can you reply in the chat? Okay, guys. So that's it for the day, and we'll reverse the next standards in the next class. We'll reverse the other standards in the next. So I hope you understood every accounting standards, and whatever the standards which is remaining, we'll discuss in the next class. Yeah, I will share these notes in the WhatsApp. Is it clear, everyone? Any other doubts? Okay, guys. So that's it. We'll discuss the rest of the standards in the next class. So make sure that you go through the standards, and I will just share in the group which all questions needs to be practiced, especially from the Kaplan question. Okay. Is it clear? Yeah, the type of questions that can get asked is like you may be asked to calculate the value, the price at which we have to show it at the face of the FS, that is at lower of cost or lower of carrying amount or that fair value less cost to disposal. And they can ask you something with respect to reversal as well. Like, you have to calculate that figure specifically, right? That is lower of carrying amount of the asset or the recoverable amount. And even there can be questions where they may ask the question fact that will you need to disclose it as a non-current as a held for sale or not? Yeah, because we have to check whether that criteria are met. Okay. Okay, so that's it.